Pilot humiliates black flight attendant for not speaking Spanish, unknowing she's fluent in 7 languages. Captain Richard Johnson was visibly irritated as he observed the activity on Flight 9517. The plane had just taken off from JFK International Airport heading to Miami when a Spanish passenger began gesturing and speaking rapidly in his native language. Flight attendant Jasmine Williams approached with a professional smile, trying to understand what the man wanted. He pointed at the window and repeated something in Spanish that she couldn't fully grasp. For a few moments, Jasmine attempted to use the little Spanish she knew, along with gestures to communicate, but the situation only grew more confusing. That's when Captain Richard appeared in the aisle, stepping out from the cockpit during a break. At 52, he was known for his 30-year career and his lack of patience for what he considered incompetence. "What's the problem here?" Richard asked, staring directly at Jasmine. "The gentleman is speaking Spanish, and I'm trying to understand what he needs." Jasmine replied, keeping her voice calm. Richard shook his head in disapproval. "What do you mean you can't understand? Isn't Spanish basic for a flight attendant?" he said loudly, not caring that other passengers could hear. Jasmine felt her face grow warm, but she maintained her composure. "Captain, I speak English and Portuguese. I'm doing my best to help." "Your best?" Richard scoffed. "I don't know how you got this job without knowing the basics. This isn't a game. We have important passengers on this flight." His words echoed through the cabin. Several passengers glanced their way, some with uncomfortable expressions. Jasmine noticed her hands trembling slightly, but she kept her posture straight. The Spanish passenger kept talking, now seeming more agitated. Richard tried to address him using a mix of broken Spanish and English, but it was clear he didn't know the language either. "You stay here and fix this," Richard said to Jasmine, pointing at her. "And next time, if you can't do your job right, maybe you should just stay in the galley making coffee." Jasmine took a deep breath and turned back to the Spanish passenger. This time she used more deliberate gestures and a few English words, finally understanding that he just wanted to know the arrival time and if there would be turbulence during the flight. "He's asking about our arrival time and if there will be turbulence, Gun," she explained to the captain. Richard looked at her with disdain. "Took you long enough to figure out something so simple. I hope we don't have any more issues on this flight." Dear listener, if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. Jasmine returned to her duties, serving passengers and ensuring everyone was comfortable. Yet with every move she made, she felt Captain Richard's critical gaze on her. He had decided to stay in the cabin longer than usual, watching her every action. While serving drinks, Jasmine accidentally brushed against a seat as she passed through the aisle. It was barely noticeable and didn't bother any passengers, but Richard immediately spoke up. "Watch it. You can't go bumping into seats. People paid good money for these." An elderly woman sitting nearby looked at the captain in surprise. "She didn't even disturb me," the passenger remarked. Richard ignored her and kept his eyes fixed on Jasmine as she worked. With every little noise she made or any movement he deemed inappropriate, he would make unnecessary comments. Jasmine tried to focus on her work, but she began to notice other crew members were also uncomfortable with the situation. Her colleague, Jennifer, a more experienced flight attendant, discreetly approached her. "Don't mind him, Jasmine. You're doing a great job," Jennifer whispered. But Richard overheard the conversation. "Jennifer, you have your own responsibilities. No need to defend someone who isn't meeting theirs," he said. The atmosphere in the cabin was growing tense. Some passengers began exchanging uneasy glances, but no one dared confront the captain directly. The situation worsened when Jasmine was serving coffee to a row of passengers. Her hands still slightly shaky from embarrassment, she spilled a few drops on the tray. Nothing fell on the floor or the passengers, but Richard noticed the small amount of liquid. "Now you're spilling coffee," he exclaimed. "This is unacceptable. You're jeopardizing passenger safety and the company's reputation." Jasmine stopped what she was doing and turned to him. "Captain, it was just a few drops on the tray, nothing spilled on the passengers or the floor." "I don't care. A mistake is a mistake. And with how you've been performing today, I'll have to file a report, Richard threatened. An elderly passenger in seat 12A discreetly pulled out his phone and began recording the scene. Mr. Walter Henderson, a 70-year-old retiree, was appalled by what he was witnessing. Other passengers also started noticing the situation. A business executive named Christine Miller, traveling for work, observed everything with growing attention. She had faced workplace discrimination herself and recognized the signs. The tension continued throughout the first half of the flight. Richard found fault in everything Jasmine did. If she adjusted the air conditioning at a passenger's request, he said she was taking too long. When she served water, he complained she wasn't efficient. When answering passenger questions, he criticized her posture. Jennifer tried defending her colleague again, but Richard was firm. "Jennifer, I have 30 years in aviation. I know when someone isn't cut out for this job, and you don't get to decide this company's quality standards." Then something happened that would completely change the course of the flight. The plane was flying over Florida when a passenger in row 15 began feeling ill. He was an Asian man, around 40, who started sweating excessively and showing signs of respiratory distress. Jasmine, who was nearby, immediately went to him. "Sir, are you feeling all right?" she asked in English. The man tried to respond but spoke only Japanese. He was clearly panicked, trying to communicate something urgent but no one could understand. Richard quickly arrived. "What's going on here?" he asked. "The passenger is feeling unwell, but he only speaks Japanese," Jasmine explained. "Japanese?" Richard seemed perplexed. "Well, call Jennifer. Maybe she can handle this better." But before anyone could move, Jasmine addressed the passenger directly in fluent Japanese. "Daijoubu desu ka? Doko ga itai desu ka?" she asked, leaning in to listen carefully. The Japanese passenger, visibly relieved to finally find someone who understood him, began speaking rapidly. Jasmine asked several specific questions and listened attentively to his answers. Richard stood completely still, watching the conversation flow effortlessly between Jasmine and the passenger. It wasn't just basic language knowledge, it was complete fluency, with perfect intonation and the use of specific medical terms. "He says he has diabetes and forgot to take his medication this morning," explained Jasmine to Richard, still standing beside the passenger. "He's feeling dizzy and nauseous. He needs something sweet urgently to raise his glucose." Richard was stunned but tried to maintain his authority. Why didn't you say you spoke Japanese?" he asked, still processing what he had just witnessed. "You didn't ask," Jasmine replied simply, already rushing to get orange juice for the passenger. She returned quickly and continued speaking to the man in Japanese, explaining what she was giving him and asking if he felt better. The passenger drank the juice and gradually his color returned to normal. Throughout the entire interaction, Richard remained silent, observing Jasmine's competence. She not only communicated perfectly in Japanese, but also demonstrated knowledge of basic medical procedures and remained calm in an emergency. Other nearby passengers also witnessed the scene. Executive Christine Miller discreetly recorded part of the interaction on her phone, impressed by Jasmine's language proficiency. When the Japanese passenger stabilized, he said something longer to Jasmine, who smiled and politely replied. "What did he say?" asked Richard, still trying to make sense of the situation. "He thanked us for the help and said he never expected to find someone who spoke Japanese so well on a domestic American flight," Jasmine translated. Richard was visibly unsettled. His authority had been quietly but powerfully challenged. Throughout the situation, Jasmine hadn't been arrogant or confrontational. She had simply done her job with exceptional competence. "Well, that was a good service," Richard muttered reluctantly. But instead of acknowledging his mistake or apologizing, he chose a different approach. "But you should have disclosed your language skills when you were hired. That's a lack of transparency," he said, searching for a way to maintain criticism. Jasmine looked him straight in the eye. "Captain, my resume was reviewed by the HR department. All the necessary information was there." Richard had no response. He knew he was being unfair, but his pride wouldn't let him admit the mistake in front of all the passengers. The rest of the flight passed in tense silence between Richard and Jasmine. She continued to perform her duties excellently, while he remained in the passenger cabin, clearly unsettled by what he had witnessed. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. As the plane began preparing for landing in Miami, another incident would further test the already tense situation. A group of French tourists seated at the rear of the plane caught a flight attendant's attention. They looked visibly confused and worried, trying to communicate something important. They spoke only French. Jennifer tried to help using gestures and a few English words, but the French tourists didn't speak English. The situation was escalating when Richard decided to step in personally. "Let me handle this," he said, pushing Jennifer a seat. Richard approached the French passengers, attempting to speak in heavily accented English, but they shook their heads, indicating they didn't understand. "Parlez-vous anglais?" Richard tried, using one of the few French phrases he knew. "Non, non, seulement français," replied one of the tourists, an elegant woman about 60 years old. Richard was clearly frustrated. He had put himself in a situation where his own language limitations were being exposed, right after criticizing Jasmine for the same issue. The French tourists began speaking more quickly, pointing at the windows and gesturing urgently. It was clear they had an important concern, but no one could understand what it was. Jasmine watched the scene from the airplane's galley. She could perfectly hear what the French passengers were saying, but she hesitated to intervene after everything that had happened. Richard tried a few more words in English and Spanish, but without success. The frustration was evident on his face. Other passengers began noticing the situation, and some looked on curiously. Finally, the French woman stood up and walked straight to Jasmine in the galley, completely ignoring Richard. "Excusez-moi, mademoiselle, parlez-vous français?" she asked Jasmine directly. Jasmine glanced quickly at Richard, who was watching with a tense expression. "Oui, je parle français. Comment puis-je vous aider?" Jasmine replied naturally. The reaction was immediate. Richard grew even paler, while the French tourist smiled in relief. The conversation flowed quickly in French. The tourist explained something while gesturing toward the windows, and Jasmine asked specific questions to better understand the situation. After a few minutes, she turned to Richard. "Captain, they're concerned because they saw smoke coming from the wing during the flight. They want to know if it's normal or if there's a safety issue." Richard was alarmed. "Smoke from the wing?" he asked, immediately worried about flight safety. "Yes, but I explained that it's normal water vapor from condensation at certain altitudes and weather conditions. It's a common phenomenon and not dangerous," Jasmine continued. "And they understood?" Richard asked. Jasmine turned back to the tourists and explained in detail in French about condensation, using the appropriate technical terms. The French woman translated for the rest of the group, who nodded in understanding. "Merci beaucoup, mademoiselle. Vous êtes très professionnelle," the tourist said, smiling at Jasmine. "De rien, madame. Si vous avez d'autres questions, n'hésitez pas à me demander," Jasmine replied. Richard observed the entire interaction in silence. Once again, Jasmine had demonstrated a competence he lacked, resolving a situation that could have become a safety issue if not properly explained. Before returning to her seat, the French tourist made a point to say loudly, in broken English, "This young lady, very good professional. She speak perfect French. Very impressive." Several nearby passengers heard the comment and looked at Jasmine with admiration. Christine Miller, the executive who had observed the whole situation from the beginning, nodded approvingly. Richard was visibly unsettled. In just a few hours, he had witnessed Jasmine speaking fluent Japanese and French, as well as handling situations he couldn't manage himself. But instead of acknowledging her ability, he chose to attack again. "Why didn't you include in your resume that you speak French and Japanese?" he asked, this time in a lower voice but still accusatory. Jasmine looked at him calmly. "Captain, what exactly are you questioning?" "I'm questioning why an employee would hide important qualifications that could be considered withholding information." Jasmine's response was measured and professional. Captain, my resume contained all the information requested by the company at the time of hiring. If there are additional qualifications the company considers important, that should be communicated during the hiring process. Richard had no logical response to that. In reality, he was creating problems where none existed, driven by the frustration of being professionally outmatched. Mr. Walter Henderson, the elderly passenger who had recorded the initial situation, continued discreetly documenting the interactions. As a retiree from the aviation industry, he recognized competence when he saw it, and was outraged by the treatment Jasmine Williams received. Christine Miller also kept watching closely. As a senior executive at a multinational company, she had witnessed many instances of subtle workplace discrimination and recognized the patterns. When the plane finally landed in Miami, passengers began preparing to disembark. During the standard farewell procedure, several made a point of personally complimenting Jasmine. The Japanese passenger who had fallen ill during the flight approached her during deplaning. "Arigato gozaimashita, anata no okaje de tasukarimasita," he said, bowing slightly. "Duita shimashite. O genki de," Jasmine replied, returning the courtesy. The man then handed her his business card. Richard Johnson observed the scene from a distance, trying to understand what was being said. When the passenger walked away, Richard approached Jasmine. "What did he say?" "He thanked me again for the service and said he was saved thanks to my help," Jasmine translated. "And the card?" Jasmine looked at the card she had received. "He's the regional director of a Japanese aviation company. Said he'll email the airline to commend the service." Richard felt a knot in his stomach. A formal commendation from an international executive would certainly catch the airline's management's attention. The French tourists also bid Jasmine a warm farewell, praising her professionalism and language skills. The Frenchwoman even asked to take a photo with her. Christine Miller was one of the last to disembark. She approached Jasmine directly. "Young lady, I'm an executive at Miller Consulting Group. I saw how you were treated during this flight, and also your exceptional competence. I'd like to speak with you about some opportunities." She handed Jasmine her card. "If you're interested in working in an environment that values your talents, please reach out." Richard overheard the conversation and grew even more uneasy. He was beginning to realize his actions might have consequences he hadn't anticipated. After all passengers had disembarked, the crew prepared for cabin cleaning and the next flight. Company protocol required the captain to conduct a quick debrief with the team. Richard gathered them at the front of the plane. "Well, we had a few incidents during the flight," he began, looking straight at Jasmine. Jennifer immediately spoke up. "Captain, if I may, I think Jasmine performed excellently. She resolved two major passenger communication issues." "Jennifer, I've told you, you don't need to defend anyone," Richard cut in. "But Captain," Jennifer insisted, "objectively speaking, she handled a medical situation and prevented a flight safety misunderstanding. That should be acknowledged." Richard was irritated, but knew Jennifer was right. Still, his wounded pride wouldn't let him admit it publicly. "What bothers me is the lack of transparency about qualifications. A flight attendant should disclose all language skills so we can allocate resources properly," he said, trying to justify his stance. Jasmine finally decided to respond directly. "Captain, with all due respect, you're making a problem where there isn't one. My resume is on file with HR. If there's information the company needs but didn't request, that's a failure in the selection process, not mine. Besides," she continued, "you spent the entire flight criticizing me for not speaking Spanish. But when situations arose requiring Japanese and French, languages you don't master either, suddenly that became my responsibility." The aircraft fell completely silent. Jennifer looked at Jasmine with admiration for her courage in confronting the captain. The other crew members remained quiet, but it was clear they agreed with her. Richard Johnson was red with anger, but also knew he had no solid arguments. "Your attitude is insubordinate," he said, pointing his finger at Jasmine. "My attitude is professional," she replied calmly. and I'm defending my right to be treated with respect." The tension was palpable. Richard was clearly losing control of the situation and didn't know how to regain his authority without admitting he was wrong. Just then, an airline employee boarded the aircraft. "Captain Johnson?" he called. "Yes, that's me. Could you come with me, please? Supervision needs to speak with you urgently." Richard glanced at the crew and then at the employee. "About what?" "We've received some complaints and compliments related to today's flight. The supervisor wants to clarify the situation." Richard's heart raced. He immediately knew it was about the events during the flight. "I'll handle this," he told the crew, trying to maintain his composure. But as he headed toward the aircraft exit, he turned back to Jasmine. "This conversation isn't over," he said, attempting to assert his authority. Jasmine met his gaze. "Captain, as far as I'm concerned, it is. From now on, I just want to do my job in peace." After Richard left the aircraft, Jennifer approached Jasmine. "Girl, you were amazing today, not just in how you assisted the passengers, but in how you stood up for yourself." "Thank you, Jennifer, but I'm worried about the consequences," Jasmine admitted. "What consequences? You did nothing wrong. On the contrary, you were exceptional." The other crew members gathered around to support her. The co-pilot, who had remained in the cockpit for most of the ordeal, spoke up. "Jasmine, as your co-pilot, I can say your service today was some of the best I've ever seen. Captain Johnson, well, he can be difficult sometimes." "Sometimes," Jennifer laughed. "He's always been complicated, but today he crossed a line." Jasmine knew she had done the right thing by standing up for herself, but she was also aware that she had directly confronted an aircraft captain, something that could have implications for her career. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. Meanwhile, Richard was in the flight supervision office being questioned by 3 people: the operations supervisor, the HR manager, and the service quality director. "Captain Johnson," the supervisor began, "we've received several communications regarding your flight today, some positive, others concerning." Richard tried to stay calm. "May I know what this is about?" The HR manager opened a folder. "We received 3 emails praising flight attendant Jasmine Williams. One is from an executive at a Japanese aviation company, another from an American businesswoman, and a third from a group of French tourists. All of them specifically commend her language skills and professionalism," she continued. The service quality director spoke up. "On the other hand, we received 2 videos sent by passengers showing you treating the same flight attendant in a questionable manner." Richard felt his blood run cold. "Videos?" "Yes. One shows you publicly criticizing the flight attendant for not speaking Spanish, using a tone that could be considered humiliating. The other shows her fluently assisting passengers in Japanese and French, languages that, according to the videos, you also don't master," the supervisor continued. "Captain, can you explain what happened?" Richard Johnson tried to come up with a justification. "Well, there was an initial situation where the flight attendant couldn't communicate with a Spanish passenger. It caused a delay in service that I considered unacceptable." "And you thought it was appropriate to publicly criticize her for that?" asked the HR manager. "I was trying to uphold the company's quality standards." The quality director shook his head. "Captain, we reviewed the employee file of Jasmine Williams. She has a degree in literature with a specialization in foreign languages. She's fluent in Portuguese, English, Spanish, French, Japanese, German, and Italian." Richard was stunned. "What do you mean? If she speaks Spanish, why didn't she resolve the initial situation?" "That's a good question," said the HR manager. "Let's bring her in to clarify." A few minutes later, Jasmine entered the room. She was visibly nervous, but maintained her professional demeanor. "Jasmine," the supervisor began, "can you explain why you didn't speak Spanish with the passenger at the start of the flight, considering we know you're fluent?" Jasmine took a deep breath before answering. "Actually, I did speak Spanish with the passenger. The issue was that he was using a very specific regional dialect from a part of Spain. It took me a few seconds to adjust to the accent and local expressions. During those seconds, Captain Richard arrived and started publicly criticizing me. From that moment on, I got nervous and my concentration was affected. The HR manager made a note. And why didn't you explain this to the captain? I tried, but he didn't give me a chance. Besides, after the way I was treated publicly, I was afraid to speak up. The quality director turned to Richard. Captain, do you have anything to say about this? Richard was clearly uncomfortable. His version of events was being disproven point by point. I may have acted hastily, but my intention was to maintain excellence. By humiliating an employee publicly? The supervisor questioned. It wasn't my intention to humiliate anyone. Jasmine spoke calmly. With all due respect, Captain, but your words and tone clearly suggested otherwise. You implied I wasn't qualified for the job and said I should just stay in the kitchen. Not only that, she continued, you criticized me for not speaking Spanish, but when situations arose requiring other languages you also don't speak. Suddenly, that became solely my responsibility. The supervisor looked at Richard. Captain, are you aware that Jasmine Williams passed our most rigorous hiring process? She had the highest language competency score in our company's history. Richard swallowed hard. This was new information to him. I wasn't aware of the details of her hiring process. The HR manager pressed on. Captain, did you review the crew files before the flight, as per protocol? It was a busy day. I may have overlooked some details. Overlooking details doesn't justify how the employee was treated, said the quality director. Jasmine remained calm, but it was clear she was choosing her words carefully. May I ask a question? She said. Of course, replied the supervisor. I want to understand if I did anything wrong. I mentally reviewed the entire flight and can't identify any significant flaw in my performance. The HR manager consulted her notes. Jasmine, according to our reports, you handled 2 language-related emergencies with excellence, maintained professional composure under pressure, and received specific praise from international passengers. We've identified no shortcomings in your performance. Richard Johnson was visibly uncomfortable. The meeting was taking a turn he hadn't expected. The supervisor addressed him directly. Captain Richard Johnson, you have 30 years of exemplary service. But what happened today doesn't align with the standards we expect from our captains. Furthermore, the supervisor continued, we have videos circulating on social media showing how our employee was treated. This could damage the company's reputation. Richard tensed. Social media? Yes. A passenger posted a video with a caption questioning whether this is the kind of leadership the company promotes. The HR manager opened her laptop. The video already has over 50,000 views, and the comments are overwhelmingly negative regarding the treatment of the employee. Richard began to panic. A social media controversy could have serious implications for his career. What do you want me to do? He asked. The quality director responded. First, we want you to acknowledge that your behavior was inappropriate. Richard looked at Jasmine, who watched him calmly. I admit I may have been too harsh in my judgment. Too harsh? Jasmine challenged. Captain, you publicly humiliated me, questioned my competence without basis, and suggested I didn't deserve to be in that role. Not only that, she continued, but you made remarks that could be interpreted as discriminatory. The supervisor nodded. Jasmine is right. Captain, your actions today could be classified as workplace harassment. Richard paled. Harassment was a serious accusation that could lead to termination. I never intended to harass anyone, he defended. Intent doesn't matter when the outcome is the same, the HR manager said. Jasmine spoke again. May I suggest something? Everyone turned to her. I don't want to ruin anyone's career, but I also can't accept being treated disrespectfully. If Captain Richard offers a sincere apology and commits to treating all crew members with respect, I'm willing to forego any formal complaint. Richard looked at her in surprise. He had expected her to use this situation against him, but she was offering him a way out. You would do that? Yes, but it has to be genuine, and you need to understand that my competence isn't up for debate. I was hired because I'm qualified. Richard took a deep breath. His career was on the line, and he knew Jasmine was being more generous than he deserved. Jasmine, I sincerely apologize for my behavior today. You've demonstrated exceptional competence, and I acted with prejudice and poor judgment. Beyond that, he continued, I recognize that you saved at least 2 critical situations during the flight, and I was wrong to criticize your qualifications. Jasmine studied him for a few seconds before responding, I accept your apology, Captain, but I hope this serves as a lesson for future situations. The supervisor interjected. Captain Richard, in addition to your apology, you'll be required to attend training on diversity and respectful leadership. It's mandatory. And Jasmine, he turned to the flight attendant, we'd like to discuss some opportunities within the company. Your language skills are exactly what we need for our international routes. Jasmine smiled for the first time since the meeting began. I'd be honored to hear more about that. When the meeting ended, Richard and Jasmine left the room together. In the hallway, he stopped her. Jasmine, thank you for not harming me. You could have ruined my career. Captain, I believe people can change and learn. I hope you learn from this, she replied. May I ask you something? Said Richard. Of course. How many languages do you actually speak? Jasmine smiled. Fluently. 7. But I have basic knowledge of 3 more. Richard shook his head, impressed. How did you learn all that? It's a long story, Jasmine said. Maybe one day I'll tell you. In the weeks that followed, the situation took interesting turns. The passenger's video did go viral on social media, but later comments, including testimonials from other passengers on the flight praising Jasmine, turned the narrative into a positive story about competence and professionalism. The airline seized the opportunity to launch a marketing campaign highlighting the diversity and qualifications of its crew. Jasmine became one of the faces of the campaign, appearing in ads speaking multiple languages. Richard completed his diversity training and, surprisingly, became one of the most active advocates for inclusive practices in the company. He realized there was much to learn about respectful leadership. But Jasmine's story was just beginning. The opportunities mentioned by her supervisor materialized in ways she had never imagined. 3 months after the incident, she was promoted to a new position at the company, International Service Coordinator. Her role would be to train crews for international routes and serve as an interpreter in special situations. On her first day in the new role, she received an unexpected email. It was from the Japanese executive she had helped during the flight. The email read, Dear Jasmine-san, our company is organizing an international aviation conference in New York City. We would like to invite you to be our lead interpreter. We were impressed by your competence and professionalism. It was an opportunity that could open doors to an international career. Jasmine accepted the invitation immediately. At the conference, she met executives from airlines around the world. Her ability to switch between languages effortlessly impressed everyone. Job offers began pouring in. But it was during the conference that Jasmine reunited with someone who would completely change her perspective on her career, Christine Miller, the executive who had given her a business card during the flight. Christine was now the director of a new initiative, a cultural exchange program for aviation professionals. Jasmine, Christine exclaimed when she saw her. What an incredible coincidence to find you here. Christine, it's so good to see you. How's your project going? Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. We're launching a groundbreaking program, and you'd be perfect to lead the intercultural communication side. Christine explained that the program would connect airlines from different countries for knowledge and best practice exchanges. The goal was to create a global network of professionals who could work anywhere in the world. It would be based in New York City, but you'd travel constantly to different countries. You'd use all your languages and even learn new ones. It was a dream opportunity for Jasmine, but before accepting, she wanted to understand something. Christine, may I ask why you were interested in my work? Was it just because of the languages? Christine smiled. Jasmine, I saw how you handled an unjust situation with dignity and professionalism. I saw how you solved complex problems under pressure. I saw how you treated even those who mistreated you with respect. She paused. Those qualities are rarer than speaking 7 languages. Jasmine was deeply moved. Throughout her life, she had worked hard to be competent, but she had never been recognized so fully. "I accept the offer," she said without hesitation. Jasmine's new job took her to countries she had only known through books. Within 6 months, she was implementing cross-cultural communication programs for airlines in Europe, Asia, and North America. During one of her trips to Japan, she reunited with the executive she had helped on the flight. He invited her to dinner, and during their conversation, he revealed something surprising. "Jasmine-san, that day on the plane wasn't just an ordinary medical emergency. I was having a panic attack because I was in a country where I couldn't communicate. When you spoke to me in Japanese, you not only solved my physical problem, but also calmed me emotionally. I never forgot that experience. That's why I recommended you for so many opportunities." Jasmine realized her communication skills went beyond words. It was about human connection. Back in the United States, she decided to expand her work. She founded an intercultural communication institute that trained professionals from various fields, not just aviation. The institute grew quickly. Multinational companies sought her services to train employees working with international teams. During one of her lectures, Jasmine spotted a familiar face in the audience. It was Richard, the captain who had humiliated her. After the lecture, he approached her. "Jasmine, may I speak with you?" "Of course, Captain." "First, I want to thank you again for not ruining my career. Second, I want you to know that day changed my life." Richard explained that diversity training had made him reflect on his biases. He had become a mentor to young pilots from different backgrounds and was working to make aviation more inclusive. "May I ask you a personal question?" he said. "Go ahead." "How did you learn all those languages? You said it was a long story." Jasmine smiled. It was the first time someone had asked about her personal story with genuine respect. "I grew up in an orphanage in New York City. Children from different nationalities came through. Immigrants, kids, refugees, children abandoned by foreign families. Since I was one of the oldest, I helped care for the younger ones. Many didn't speak English, so I started learning their languages to communicate with them, comfort them, and help them adjust." Richard listened intently. "I learned Japanese from a girl whose parents died in an accident, French from twins abandoned by tourists, German from a refugee boy, and so on. The orphanage had a small library with books in multiple languages donated by embassies. I spent hours studying, first to help the children, then because I discovered I loved the diversity of languages. By the time I left the orphanage at 18, I was fluent in 6 languages. I learned the 7th in college." Richard was visibly moved. "So your language skills came from a desire to help others?" "Exactly, and that's why I never boast about them. To me, they're tools for connection, not superiority." "Now I understand why you forgave me so easily," Richard said. "We all have our story, Captain. Sometimes we act poorly out of ignorance, not malice." That conversation marked the beginning of an unlikely friendship between Jasmine and Richard. He became one of the biggest supporters of her institute, helping connect her with aviation professionals who needed cross-cultural training. Years later, Jasmine's institute had trained thousands of professionals and become an international benchmark in intercultural communication. During an awards ceremony where she received the Intercultural Communication Professional of the Year recognition, Jasmine was invited to give a speech. She began by telling the story of the flight where it all started. She spoke about how a moment of humiliation turned into an opportunity for growth, not just for her, but for everyone involved. "Sometimes our toughest moments are the seeds for our greatest triumphs," she told the audience of hundreds of international professionals. "But the real triumph isn't individual. It's when we can turn our experience into something that benefits others." In the audience, Richard Johnson clapped with emotion. Beside him sat Christine Miller, now CEO of the company that had become the largest in the intercultural communication sector in the United States. Also present were dozens of professionals Jasmine had trained, now working around the world, connecting cultures and breaking communication barriers. After the speech, a young flight attendant approached Jasmine. "My name is Emma. I've been a flight attendant for 2 years and have already faced situations like yours. Does your institute offer scholarships?" "We do," Jasmine replied with a smile. "But tell me, which languages would you like to learn?" Actually, I already speak 4 languages. My dream is to become an instructor like you. Jasmine saw the same spark in Emma's eyes that she herself had had years ago. How about we talk on Monday? We might have the perfect opportunity for you. Emma walked away beaming. It was exactly the kind of opportunity Jasmine had dreamed of when she was just a flight attendant facing discrimination. That evening, Jasmine reflected on her journey. She had started as a young woman from an orphanage who learned languages to help children. She had become a flight attendant out of financial necessity. She had endured humiliation and discrimination, but she had turned every obstacle into a stepping stone to the next level. Her institute now had branches in 12 countries. She had written 3 books on intercultural communication. She gave lectures at universities and international conferences. But what made her proudest were the hundreds of professionals she had helped advance in their careers. Richard had become an example of how people can change and grow. He now led a diversity program in aviation that served as a model for other companies. Christine Miller had built a business empire based on the philosophy that diversity and inclusion weren't just morally right, but also economically advantageous. Most importantly, no young professional would have to go through what Jasmine had endured. Her institute had created discrimination reporting protocols and training programs that were transforming the corporate culture of dozens of companies. The next morning, Jasmine received an email that made her smile. It was from a European airline asking if she could train their crew for a new route connecting New York City to 7 cities across different continents. The route would require a crew fluent in at least 5 languages, and they wanted Jasmine to develop the entire training program. It was ironic. She had once been criticized for not speaking Spanish. Now, companies worldwide sought her out to teach multiple languages. But Jasmine knew her true skill wasn't just in languages. It was in turning adversity into opportunity, finding connection where others saw difference, and building bridges where others built walls. As she accepted the new project, she imagined how many young professionals could benefit from the program, how many stories like hers could have an even better ending. Because in the end, the most fluent language Jasmine had learned to speak was the language of hope, and this was a language she could teach to anyone, anywhere in the world. The end of the story. And what about you, dear listener? What did you think of this story of perseverance and transformation? Have you ever been in a similar situation or know someone who faced discrimination at work? Share your thoughts in the comments about how Jasmine handled the situation and whether you believe people can truly change like Captain Richard. Your input means so much to us. Don't forget to leave a like if the story moved you, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other inspiring stories of courage and triumph.